Welcome to the Synoptic Gospels, a recap by Rachel Bowman. So why the Synoptic Gospels? There are 4 official Gospels in the New Testament. However, the Synoptic Gospels are only Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So why are there only 3 in the Synoptic Gospels? The reason is because Matthew, Mark, and Luke are seen together, which is where we get the Greek word synoptic. So how are they the same? Which came first? We'll talk about that and throughout this talk. So next we talk about the Markan theory. The Markan theory is that the Gospel of Mark was written first and is the primary source for the other 2 Gospels. There are unique verses in Mark, Matthew, and Luke. So now let's go ahead and talk about each of the Gospels themselves and the Synoptic Gospels. The first book is the book of Matthew. Matthew was anonymous, but it was thought to be Matthew the tax collector who wrote this particular Gospel. It was said to be written after the book of Mark because, like mentioned previously, Mark was supposed to be written first and used as a source for the other 2 Synoptic Gospels. The Gospel of Matthew connected Jesus to the Old Testament, it fulfilled the Old Testament, and gave prophetic promise. It includes things like the Sermon on the Mount and the Great Commission. Next, we have the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark is known to be written by John Mark. It's written mostly for non-Jews, and it's said to be the first Gospel written, mostly information from Peter the disciple. It talks about who Jesus is, that he's the Messiah, and how he became king. Next, we have the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Luke is known to be a bit more detailed than the other 2 Synoptic Gospels. It is written by Luke the doctor. The very beginning of Luke in Luke 1:1, it mentions, many have undertaken to draw upon this account. So what Luke is saying here is that he has gotten a detailed account in his particular gospel. Luke was a co-worker with Paul the apostle. Luke mentions Jesus' mission, his journey to Jerusalem, his final days, John's baptism, his 40 days in the wilderness, and of course, the same things that the other Gospels do, the birth, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus. The Gospel of Luke is also the longest Gospel to be recorded, with 1,149 verses. So as mentioned previously, the Synoptic Gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So why is John not included? Well, there's several ways that John is the same as the other 3 Gospels, and there's several ways that it's different. The ways that John is the same is it does tell the basic same story and the same events. It talks about the temple rebuilding, the prophets without honor, and receiving the Lord and the one who sent him. And it also talks about the predictions of betrayal. Now, some ways that it's different is the style, the plot, and the presentation are all quite different than the other Gospels. For instance, in the beginning of the book, it starts out with saying, in the beginning, which takes us back to in the beginning in Genesis. And it talks about the Word was God, which is similar again to Genesis. It uses dualistic language like the light and the dark, truth and lie, which is not something that's present in the other 2 Gospels. There are no exorcisms to be recorded in the book of John, and the book of John also mentions the 7 I am statements. So this is a basic recap of the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and why John is a bit different than those 3. The Gospels still come together for a beautiful portrait of what the Lord wants for us to know in his Gospel. Just like John Piper says, we take photos for exact representation. If we paint 4 different portraits of the same photo, they will all speak differently, but not contradict. It's the same with the Gospels.